Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And now, here are your hosts, Scott and Jesse from CompassKnox.com.
Hello and welcome back again to Compass Points, the weekly podcast where we talk about Knoxville news, events, government, politics, anything else that gets our attention. I'm Jesse Mayshark, co-founder and co-publisher of Compass at CompassKnox.com, which covers all of the above. I am zooming in remotely today because I've somehow managed to catch the last cold of 2022, which I guess is now going to be the first cold of 2023. Happy New Year to me. I'm joined there in the Barbarian Productions studio by Scott Barker, also co-founder and co-publisher of Compass. How are you doing today, Scott?
I'm doing better than you are, I assume. No cold, no ill effects from the frigid temperatures and snowfall and all that good stuff we've had.
Well, good. And we should say that this episode is going to be released on New Year's Day. We are recording it on Friday, December 30th. But first of all, Happy New Year, everybody. We made it around one more time, and we get to start all over again. Scott, you got any big plans for New Year's Eve?
No big plans for New Year's Eve. We always kind of hunker down at home and don't venture out. Seems the older I get, the more dangerous it seems out there with all the youngins out there partying and all. So we're staying home.
Yeah, I feel very much the same. I mean, of course, I don't think I'm going to feel much like going out anyway, but last year I had to go out on New Year's Eve to pick up one of my kids, and this was maybe 11 p.m. or so. It was before midnight, and I saw some of the worst driving that I'd seen all year. And for those of you who are familiar with Knoxville driving, that's saying something. So yes, I hope anybody who did go out, was safe about it. I thought that we could kick off this first episode of the new year. First of all, by talking a little bit about New Year's resolutions. Doesn't have to be anything too big or intense, but Scott, you have any resolutions for the new year?
Well, my primary resolution was going to be to stop procrastinating, but I'm going to put that off for a few months. Anyway, actually, it is one that I'm going to try to do because I am a terrible procrastinator, and I've got some health goals, weight loss goals,
sure.
Just kind of the usual boring stuff. But one of the things that's kind of driving that is later this week I turn 60, and it's time to stop acting like I'm 30 and to start acting like I'm 60 and take a little better care of myself.
The big 6-0. Yeah. Any of our listeners out there who are already at or above that threshold, if you have any advice for Scott about how to navigate those shoals, feel free to drop him a line at barker@CompassKnox.com. I saw somebody just on Facebook today saying that they also wanted to cut down on procrastinating this year. And, I kind of feel like procrastination is actually an important part of my workflow. As I've gotten older, I've learned to embrace the procrastination. I kind of feel like it's when my brain is kind of organizing information behind the scenes without me knowing it, and it'll let me know when it's actually ready to get back to work. And that may be rationalization, but Seth, what about you? You got any New Year's resolutions?
I got a few things. I have a couple professional things. I would like to get out of my day job. I'm ready to retire from that one. I would like to get to produce a few more shows. I'd like to expand the production studio, get some more opinion style shows. I love you guys for the news part of it, but I'd like to kind of get a spectrum of kind of pundits that I can come in and have their own shows and then do cross shows every once in a while and get everybody together and get a more active, I don't know, political scene, for lack of a better word. Try to get some more engagement because we got a great city race coming up. We got a mayor and all that kind of stuff. You know, we've been through all these elections, and I know from my experience on my show and talking to you guys, engagement's probably the number one factor that can make positive change that everybody wants, and it seems to be the absolute hardest thing for any of us to figure out how to get anybody to do. And I'm a big podcast fan in general, and so to try to get more podcasts with more voices that are specifically local, because it's really hard to get the local side outside of you guys, really, is what I've always said. And so I'd like to produce a few more shows, maybe put a daily show together where it's kind of a conglomerate of a bunch of different kind of sides of the story. That's one of my big goals for this year.
Well, and why don't you go ahead and give it a plug? If anybody out there is interested, has maybe been thinking, maybe I should get into this podcasting thing, and they wanted to contact you about that, what should they do?
You can go to the Almost an Agreement website and contact me through that email. And there's also Barbarian Pro, but it's BARBER, which is my last name, IAN, Barbarian Pro at Gmail is a way to get a hold of me directly. If you're interested, and I can put a rate sheet together. And it's really customizable to what you guys want to do. Like, your guys' format is absolutely different than my format on my show, and we can do a lot of fun stuff on a pretty decently small budget for people in here.
Right. Well, if you already listened to this show, you're hearing some of Seth's production work already. So yeah, if you're interested, give him a shout. I feel kind of bad because you guys are talking about, Scott wants to get healthier, which I guess I want to get healthier too. Who doesn't? And Seth, you want to improve the level of civic engagement. My resolution is I just want to get out of the country. 2021, I did not manage a single trip outside the borders of the United States. And I love to travel. My wife and I love to travel. We have had multiple trips canceled over the past few years because of various things related to COVID. We have another one planned for this coming June that would take us over to Europe. So fingers crossed. But that's my resolution, is just to get out of here for a little while. All right. Well,
that's a good resolution. I think that getting away and seeing new things and being around, being in a culture that's different from your own is a healthy thing. It makes you...
Totally agree. One thing I enjoy about being outside the United States is reading or watching the local news wherever I am, and often it's someplace where I don't speak the language, so you kind of have to try to figure out what's going on. But, you go to other places and you realize, like, they're all having problems too. They're all struggling with a lot of the same things. Other countries are struggling with immigration. They're struggling with democracy. They're having economic problems, but it's kind of nice to be someplace where you feel like it's not your problem for at least a couple of weeks. You can let them worry about those things and you can just kind of enjoy the scenery. So that is one of the things that I enjoy about it.
Right. Unless their complaint is the tourists, unless that's the problem they're having, then you do still have to worry about it.
Well, I have to say that in my experiences traveling abroad, almost every place I've ever gone, people are mostly very receptive to tourists for the same reason that we are here in East Tennessee. They bring money. So if you show up and you're staying in the hotels and dining in the restaurants, people are usually pretty happy to see you, which is nice. Okay, well, let's move on from the New Year's niceties and talk about this past week, the last week of 2022. We did not have a tremendous amount of real news, which is pretty normal for that week. we at Compass spent the week kind of publishing our annual year in review stories. And so we are going to be talking a little bit about the past year, some of the major stories and themes that we saw there. But there was one sort of dominant news topic in the past week, which came out of the really crushing cold wave that we had right before Christmas, where we had a couple of days where it barely, if at all, got out of the single digits. And Scott, this led to some problems for the Tennessee Valley Authority and their ability to continue to keep the lights on for everybody. So can you talk a little bit about what happened and what has TVA said about it?
Well, what happened, and I hate to use the perfect storm analogy, so I'll say it was a perfect confluence of events that came together. The cold snap wasn't just a regular cold snap. It wasn't, it was cold in East Tennessee and North Mississippi, which is also in the TVA service area. It was fine. So it was throughout the TVA service area, and not only throughout the TVA service area, it was throughout the nation. 44 of the 48 of the lower 48 states were affected by freezing temperatures like this, which meant almost every utility was affected by this. And one thing that happens in cold weather is utilities help each other out. If we've got a really big cold snap here and TVA needs extra power, they can buy it from Duke Energy in North Carolina, provided that Duke Energy isn't under the same weather. And usually it's not. Usually it's either warmer or colder there than it is here. But utilities buy and sell power among themselves as needed to keep the grid going. Well, they couldn't really do that because everybody was using all the power they could create. And then you had some failures on TVA's part too. You had some equipment at some of the plants was damaged by wind, high winds that accompanied the storm, and also there were some just plain old equipment failures, which were TVA's fault, and so all of those things led them to institute these rolling blackouts. They asked all of their local utilities, there were 153 local utilities who buy power from TVA, and they asked them to institute these brief 15 to 20 minute blackouts and go throughout the entire service areas. And I think KUB went through cycled through two or three times through its service area. And the one thing that was, and that infuriated a lot of people. The power went out, then it came back on. Then a few hours later, went out again, came back on.
And we didn't have any warning of this. There was no notification like your power is going to go off in 10 minutes. So, finish up what you're doing.
It was kind of one of those things is, TVA told the local companies they needed to do it. The local companies started doing it, and, it was kind of a surprise to a lot of people. And one of the reasons that's so that people got so mad is when your power goes out and it's 8 degrees, you don't know how long it's going to be out. You're sitting there going, well, do I need to pile everybody in the car and go to a hotel? Do we, stick it out? Do I need to, what do I need to do? Because you don't know how long it's going to last. And I think that uncertainty drove a lot of the anger behind that, and people were very angry.
TVA has basically said that, they haven't exactly been defensive about this, right? They said we failed to deliver on what we're supposed to, and we're going to assess this and make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, they have not tried to sugarcoat it at all. They've said, we don't, our goal. On the one hand, they will say, this has never happened before. in the 90-year history, and everybody has said that. Other utilities, same thing happened to them. Duke Energy, which I mentioned earlier, they had rolling blackouts in North Carolina. On the one hand, they do say, hey, this was a truly unprecedented event. And on the other hand, they also say, but it's our job to deliver the power without interruption, and we failed to do that. Now, I will say one thing, in when you talk to people in utilities, they don't like to get into hypotheticals and talk about, worst case scenarios very often. But one of the reasons that they did this is to prevent, because they weren't going to have enough power for the whole region. KUB wasn't going to have enough power for KUB's service area. TVA wasn't going to have enough power for its region. Doing this, it's kind of almost like a prescribed burn to prevent a big forest fire, in that they did these outages, short temporary outages all throughout the system to keep one big area from going down completely for a long time, which can lead to cascading outages, like what happened in Texas last year, and what happened, the big Con Ed fiasco in the Northeast several years ago. I guess it's been a couple of decades now, but where you have widespread outages over long periods of time, and that's what they were really trying to avoid. And I think that they're, probably taking it on the chin a little bit, because if that had happened, I think that people would, you ran the risk of people dying if that happened with those temperatures. So, but yeah, they are going to said that they're doing this assessment of kind of what led up to it, how it could be prevented again, and try to institute procedures to keep it from happening again.
Well, we will certainly report on that when it comes out, and any recommendations that they make. I think one thing that's interesting when people talk about unprecedented events, I mean, that's true, but as we're seeing, and of course, it's hard, we know, to pinpoint the cause of any one event, to say that this is because of climate change or whatever. But it is also true that we are having an increasing number of unprecedented meteorological events. We've had unprecedented flooding, we've had unprecedented heat, we've had unprecedented cold. And so it seems like you reach a point where you have to kind of stop saying, well, this has never happened before, because there's no particular reason to think it's not going to happen again, right?
Yeah. Just because it was unprecedented in 2022 doesn't mean it won't happen in 2023 or 2024 or 2025. You're right. Climate change has caused a lot of an increase in numbers and intensities of storms and where they're located. This was, but for what TVA says, this as far as their 90-year history as being as providing electricity in the Tennessee Valley, this had never happened before. And but I think they're also acknowledging it could happen again, so we better improve things before that happens.
All right. Well, I'm sure we will have more coverage of this as the year progresses. Let's go ahead and move into our year in review discussion. I thought we could kind of quickly hit on some of the major areas that we covered, and also talk about a couple of issues that kind of went beyond any specific, local governmental entity. But to begin with, Knox County government, obviously this past year was an interesting one because we had a whole bunch of elections, which we wrote about a lot, and you can find that coverage on our website. On the one hand, big picture, those elections didn't change anything too dramatically. Basically, all of the major incumbent office holders basically every incumbent office holder who ran for re-election won re-election. The county Republican Party remains very dominant. It won every single countywide race, was won by a Republican. County Mayor Glenn Jacobs reelected to a second term, Sheriff Tom Spangler, District Attorney General Sharm Allen. That said, there were some interesting wrinkles there, which we've talked about on the show before. In the August county general election, the Democratic candidates overall had a better showing maybe than some people expected, certainly than they have in recent years. Jacobs did win re-election, but he won by about a 55 to 45% margin over the Democrat Debbie Helsley, which is a much lower margin than the 66% margin he had the first time he was elected in 2018. So the Democratic Party, Matt Shears, the chairman, found reasons to, kind of declare a certain kind of moral victory, even if not too many actual electoral victories. And then, of course, on county commission, we had the interesting shift where, although the partisan makeup stayed the same, we have 9 out of 11 commissioners are Republicans. The gender makeup changed, and for the first time, we have a woman majority. 6 members of the 11-member commission are women, which was interesting for all of us to kind of talk about on paper after the election. Oh, we're going to have the first female majority on county commission. But the rubber really met the road when they had their first official meeting of the new commission, where they elected chair every year. And former chairman Richie Beeler had said he would be willing to serve a second year as chair, and most people who I talked to anyway expected that he would. But what happened instead was the 6 women on commission all banded together and elected Courtney Durrett, a Democrat, as chair. So there's only 2 Democrats on commission, but one of them is now the chair. And it was a really interesting sort of shot across the bow. The 6 women who are on commission don't necessarily have a ton in common politically. Again, 2 are Democrats, 4 are Republicans. Even among the Republicans, they are not necessarily all cut from the same cloth. But they seemed to decide that they wanted to kind of make their voices heard en masse, and didn't want to just kind of wait their turn to take over at some future point. So that was interesting, and it's been interesting the last few months to watch that new commission kind of feel its way forward. Mayor Jacobs obviously has a strong hand now, having won re-election, but he also is already encountering some pushback from some of those new commissioners. He's not necessarily super close to Commissioner Rhonda Lee, Commissioner Kim Frazier, Commissioner Gina Oster. None of them come in necessarily as real close allies of Mayor Jacobs. And of course, we all kind of anticipate that Jacobs is now also going to be thinking forward. A lot of people expect that he's going to run for governor with a serious look. And so how he kind of navigates the politics of county commission at the same time that he is probably trying to raise his profile statewide, those will be interesting things. So, Scott, tell us about the city of Knoxville this past year.
Yeah, the city kind of had 3 big things that went on. One was the the ongoing stadium construction issue. Coming into the year, thought that the construction would be started by now. They knew they had a cost estimate of $80.1 million. They had everything in place except the kind of the final little bits of the development agreement that with Boyd Sports that would actually be able to kick off the actual construction. But then inflation caught up with them. Of course, during toward the end of 2021, materials costs started rising exponentially in the construction industry. Steel went up 127%. Everything went up. Diesel prices went up, as we all know. But all these materials costs went up, and they suddenly realized they would not be able to build the stadium for $80.1 million, so they put it on hold. They said, "Hey, we'll see what shakes out." Then later on in the year, when some things were prices were stabilizing, but it was obvious that they weren't all going to stabilize as much as, or at least come back down to pre-pandemic levels anytime soon. So they ended up trying to come up with a deal to, if they need more money, they're going to borrow it from Randy Boyd, the owner of Boyd Sports and president of the University of Tennessee. So to do that, they also established and then expanded a tax increment financing district to help pay for that. And what that does is any new development within this district, which is from the old city up to Magnolia Avenue and around the stadium, any new development in there, the new tax revenue from that development will go to help pay for the infrastructure around the stadium, as well as the service on this loan that Randy Boyd has promised. We don't know how much that's going to be. They still do not have a final budget set. That should happen in January, and so that's one thing that we'll be looking forward to. We also, another big event in the city was hiring of a new police chief. Chief Eve Thomas, in November of last year, announced she would be retiring. So Mayor India Kincannon, who said this was going to be the biggest hire of her administration. This was put a lot of importance on this. And so they got a search firm to come in. First of all, they got some public input on what the public wanted from the next police chief. Then they hired a search firm to go out and actually do the search. We'll get into that. Caused some controversy later. We'll get into that in a minute. But they came up with the top candidate was Paul Noel, who is the assistant superintendent in New Orleans, the New Orleans
assistant police chief.
Pardon me?
Assistant police chief.
No, that wasn't his title, but yeah, but it was an assistant police chief. They call it assistant superintendent.
Okay, I thought you were crossing streams with the school system.
No. Noel came in, he took the job. He's got a kind of a reputation as a reformer, and he came in and indeed has begun making some big changes at KPD. They did a what they called a climate assessment, looking at the culture of KPD. They even started that before he even started work. Then those findings came out. He's going to use that to help inform some of his decision making moving forward. He's reorganized the department primarily in the patrol. What used to be the patrol division, it's divided into 3 sectors instead of 2. And putting more responsibility on commanders in the field, and more accountability and responsibility on them. He's also instituting what they call bystander training, and this is really kind of gets to the heart of some of the issues that have been at KPD, where where it seems in a lot of instances that officers who will cover for other officers who misbehave or do some wrong things, whether it's inside the station or out in the field, whatever. And the bystander training is to train officers how to take responsibility for one another and prevent those kinds of things from happening in the future. And so he's doing all of these things, and he's already done. He's been here half a year, and he's doing that, and we'll see going forward. One of the things is he hasn't yet been confronted with anything major. He's had a couple of disciplinary issues, but nothing that would really be a test yet of his leadership. And when that happens, and unfortunately that does happen from time to time, we'll see how he responds. Now, I was mentioned earlier the search. One of the things that about that search is the city scrupulously made sure that the search organization, search firm, the Police Executive Research Forum, that they kept all the documents regarding the chief search, resumes, any other materials, all those documents stayed with them. And the city claims that they never produced any documents and don't have any of the documents. Well, the News Sentinel editor Joel Christopher thought, and it does stretch stretch credulity that they would make that big of a decision without having their own paperwork. But he thought that was a bit far-fetched, and has sued the city under the state's Public Records Act, and wanting to get a hold of those documents. They were wanting to find out who the finalists were, how the process went, all that stuff. The city, obviously says we don't have the documents. We don't have anything to give you. And one of the interesting things is that one of the reasons the city did this was to keep the search or the identities of the candidates private, so that their employers wouldn't know they were looking for a job and possibly seek retribution against them for looking elsewhere for a job. And interestingly, Noel himself said if there had been a public search, he wouldn't have done it. He wouldn't have applied. And he'd just gone through a public search. He was a finalist in Chattanooga when they were looking for their chief. And apparently he did not have a good experience with that being a public search, because he said he would not do that. So that's another issue that's going to carry over. They filed both Christopher and the city have filed motions in court, and we'll see how that's. I don't think anything's scheduled yet as far as hearings go, but that's another kind of issue that would be following looking forward.
And the city's stated interest in this, as you say, is that they promised those applicants that it would be a private search. And so, I mean, obviously, we all know who Noel is at this point. He applied, he got the job, but it's really those other candidates who the city is still trying to protect, right?
Yeah, well, they were trying to protect all of them. That they just didn't. They were concerned that if the police chief in a city, because we don't know which cities they applied from, but if they found out that their deputy chief was applying for a Knoxville job, they might demote them. They might do things to chase them off. Do whatever. And you can understand. I mean, Noel had been at NOPD for 25 years. And there was it was kind of probably surprising to the brass at NOPD that when they found out he was looking for the Chattanooga job, because he'd spent he's a New Orleans native, spent his entire career in New Orleans. You didn't, I can imagine that that they were shocked about that, and apparently he did not. He doesn't talk about it, but apparently he had a bad enough experience that he wouldn't have applied here had it been a public search.
And then American Cannon also had a tax increase, right?
Yes, she did. One of the things that has been an issue in city government one of the things that's been an issue has been the recruiting and maintaining employees. KPD is chronically 50 or so officers short. The public service department's often short. Almost all the departments in the city have openings that have been open for a long time. It's been hard for them to fill those jobs. And they wanted to restructure the pay of all the city departments. And they had a study conducted that showed that city employees by and large were, on average, were 10%, paid 10% under the rest of the market. So they decided they wanted to adjust the pay structure and get the employees more money, which would help with recruiting and retaining employees. And also, they were at the end of a cycle where revenues were not keeping up with expenditures anyway. And so this all came together at once. And so Mayor Concannon proposed a 50-cent property tax increase. This was complicated by the fact that this was also a reassessment year where everybody's property, the property assessor reassessed everybody's property values. After it was all said and done, the hit on some property owners is pretty extensive. Because their property values went up by 40%. So on average, some went up even more. So anyway, there is that did go through. Obviously with any tax increase, there's usually some resistance from the public, and people were not. There are a lot of people who weren't pleased with it, but it ended up passing pretty easily with almost no real. I mean, there was some opposition, but it passed pretty easily. So they anticipate that this will keep the city in good shape for the next 3 or 4 years at least, and maybe longer. So we'll see. They're just now getting ready after the first of the year to start their budgeting process for next year, and so there's usually a mid-fiscal year review of how this budget is doing as far as keeping up with expenditures. So so we should find out in February exactly kind of where the city stands.
Yeah, and I should mention that Knox County, which of course has not had a property tax increase since 1999 at this point, their tax rate went down too because, for the same reason the cities did. The overall property values across the county went up, and so the tax rate had to be adjusted down. And the county's tax rate is now just over $1.50 per $100 assessed, which gives it at least the lowest tax rate since 1948. Chris Caldwell in the county finance department said he doesn't actually have records back beyond that. So this may be our lowest tax rate that we've had, since World War II or before. But anyway, it is at a very low rate now. Knox County Schools, it had a lot of change this year. Basically, we ended the year with a different superintendent than we started the year with. John Ryswick was hired by the school board in February and actually took office in June. Speaking of assistant superintendents, he had been an assistant superintendent. Now he's superintendent. The school board had its first partisan elections in 20 years because of that change in state law that we've talked about several times. And the most interesting race in that cycle was the 4th district, which is now represented by a Democrat, Catherine Bike, and a lot of people expected that's a West Knoxville district. It's represented on county commission by a Republican, Kyle Ward. A lot of people expected that Will Edwards, who was the Republican candidate for that seat and who raised more than twice as much money as Bike did and had endorsements from sort of every major Republican in the county, people thought that he would win, and he did not. It was close, but she won. And so that gives the board now an interesting split. They basically have a 5-member Republican majority, and then 2 Democrats, Bike and the Reverend John Butler, and 2 independents. And already like the new board members just took office at the beginning of September, but already in just sort of the last 4 months of the year, we saw that play out a few times. Obviously, not every issue that comes before the school board is controversial or has strong partisan lines, but there have already been a few votes that pretty clearly broke along those political lines. For one thing, they voted to drop out of an organization called the Coalition of Large School Systems, which Knox County has been part of since that group was formed in 2007 or 2008. And it had been the 4 biggest school systems in the state, which is Knox County, Hamilton County, Davidson, Nashville, and Shelby County. And they had all been lobbying together at the state legislature. And the school board, the Knox County School Board, decided they don't want to be part of that group anymore. And of course, if you kind of look at the politics of it, Nashville and Memphis are the 2 largest Democratic strongholds in the state. And I think that some of the Knox County school board members in that Republican majority felt like they didn't necessarily want to be yoked so explicitly to those big blue city Democrats. And really, Susan Horn, one of the school board members, made the case that in talking to Republican legislators, she thought Knox County would be better off approaching the Republican supermajority on its own rather than, being in tandem with Nashville and Memphis.
Well, that's a pretty common thing over there now when you talk to people about the legislature, and especially Nashville. Nashville is the lightning rod for a lot of those things, and so almost anything, not almost anything, a lot of initiatives that the Davidson County Commission comes up with, or council comes up with, or the Metro Nashville School Board, those things that prompts the legislature to take a look at that and maybe sometimes restrict what local governments can do, and in a way that if Chattanooga or Knoxville or even Memphis would do the same thing, doesn't, they don't bat an eye. But for some reason, I guess because it's the state capital and they spend a lot of time there, Nashville draws a lot of attention.
Well, yeah, and Nashville, the Metro Council this year also last year voted against inviting the Republican National Convention there in 2024, and that made a lot of Republicans in the state legislature mad, and we're probably going to hear more about this coming year. So, yeah, I do think that was part of the rationale by some Knox County school board members was to say, we don't. It's not necessarily in our political interest to show up on Capitol Hill there, arm in arm with Nashville. It's better to have a little bit of distance. So, meanwhile, Ryswick, after he took office, he really reorganized the school system administration pretty significantly, brought in a whole new set of assistant superintendents, reorganized the whole district along this kind of regional governance structure where schools, elementary, middle, and high schools that are all in the same area and serve the same population are going to kind of be governed at a regional level below the superintendent level. And the biggest challenge that Ryswick now faces came with the release of state data from last year's state testing that came out in September, and that put Knox County in the lowest 5% of school systems across the state, according to the state's ranking system. And they ranked the districts on a number of different metrics. The ones that really hurt Knox County were some ongoing problems with chronic absenteeism, some very high absentee numbers, and also the student growth measurement, which does not measure absolute results on a test, but basically how much growth an individual student showed from one year to the next. those numbers are not good countywide either. And so that kind of put Knox County in this in need of improvement designation by the state. And Ryswick basically took that opportunity. I mean, it's a challenge, like I said, but also an opportunity for a new leader to come in and say, well, here's the problem, and here's what I'm going to do about it. And he kind of made the case that the reorganization that he's doing, the priorities that he set, these are the things that are going to make the difference in those numbers. So he'll probably get a little bit of lead time to show some progress there. I mean, he's only now been in the superintendent's chair for just over half a year. And so I don't know that anybody necessarily expects things to just kind of magically transform overnight. But certainly that raised the level of scrutiny and pressure that he's going to be under to really kind of deliver on a lot of what he's talked about. And then at the other end of the educational spectrum, we had the University of Tennessee, which also had some interesting things happen this year.
Oh, yeah. The university, they were all over the map, too. There was some of the just kind of nuts and bolts stuff. Enrollment is at record levels. Budget hit almost just a shade under $3 billion for the UT system. That's huge. They're one of the things that President Randy Boyd talks about is how, it's our mission to reach students. The more students we reach, the more we're fulfilling our mission. And so that was a kind of the big news that they wanted to really put forward coming out. But then he also had a couple of things that came through the state legislature that had a big impact on UT. One of them is a bill that was controversial during, when it was passed, and has proven controversial in its application so far. And that's the so-called Divisive Concepts Bill. And what it was put forward by Republicans in the legislature, who were basically considered it to be a fight back against liberal indoctrination in the academy. So what it was is set forward several concepts that basically involving race and gender, class, that professors could not force their students or UT employees to adhere to those, or they could be sued. And what the faculty took that to basically mean, don't teach it. Don't teach these things, because if you do, you're going to get sued. And they argued that had a chilling effect on their academic freedom and free and open discussion in classrooms, that there were many courses that you just could not teach without that. The legislature passed it anyway, was not deterred from that at all. And in fact, during the fall semester, there was a 2-day in-class protest where professors from various disciplines went ahead and taught the divisive concepts, basically throwing down the gauntlet and said, okay, you've got these restrictions on us teaching this, we're going to teach it anyway. And so they did that. So far, to my knowledge, there have been no repercussions yet on that. But
and that, because that law is basically up to it's complaint driven, right? Like a student would have to come and say, this professor required me to adhere to this divisive concept, and
the UT administration has they kind of play a delicate little balancing act, because they don't want to offend the legislature, because that's where they get a lot of their money. But they're saying, listen, we don't punish people for believing something or not believing something. We discuss it, and so we have nothing to worry about. And they're a little bit less. The faculty members are a lot more concerned than the administration seems to be about that, because the administration seems to think that as long as we don't punish someone for not adhering to a concept in our classrooms, then we're okay. And people generally don't get punished for not adhering to something. They might get a bad grade for misrepresenting something, or for not knowing about a concept that's taught in the class. But it's be hard to prove that there's actual punishment involved, in something like this. But we'll see. Like I said, it is complaint driven. Students and faculty have only been dealing with it for a semester, so we'll see how we'll have to see how the academic year unfolds. I don't even know if they've gotten their grades yet. So there might be somebody who gets a D or an F in a political science class or something like that who files a complaint, and then that'll be interesting to see how follow that and see how that plays out. There's some other another thing that the legislature did was they approved Governor Bill Lee's proposal for an Institute of American Civics to be housed at the Baker Center on the UT Knoxville campus. It was Lee, kind of brought that out in his State of the State address in conjunction with his embrace of Hillsdale College and K through 12 civics education, but as a way to return to looking at American exceptionalism, as a matter, frankly, and how and to promote civil discourse and civics education with a big focus on originalism and kind of the founding documents and the founding fathers. That apparently there's the thought that that isn't being done well enough in traditional civics classes. So, but they're going to be the legislature passed it, they funded it. They're just now organizing the institute. It's going to be they have named a board of fellows. Their job would be to advise the institute on various things and to help with the civic outreach portion of the mission, because it is more than just an academic endeavor. It's also an outreach endeavor, and then it's a bipartisan group. Governor Phil Bredesen and Governor Bill Haslam. Thank you. I kept trying to say Bill Lee. It was, but both former governors of Tennessee, one Haslam a Republican, Bredesen a Democrat. They're on this board of fellows, and the rest are mostly academics with various areas of expertise from various political viewpoints. So the Baker Center has embraced it, even though this was the idea of the governor and the legislature to do. They have embraced it and are in the process of kind of setting up the academic side of the Institute's mission. And,
all right. Well,
the couple other things mentioned earlier that Randy Boyd, the president of the university, talked about educating more students being the mission. And it's one of the since this is a land grant college or land grant institution, that's what they do. One of the things that he's doing is they're entering into an agreement with Arizona State University to increase their online degree programs exponentially. The Arizona State's got one of the largest in the online education programs in the country. We've talked about this before when the word first kind of came out about it. And when we say that, we're not talking about just adding a few classes online here or there. This is for people to be able to take an entire degree program without stepping foot on campus. And so that's a departure from what they've done in the past, but it's got the potential to add tens of thousands of new students who would, of course, pay tuition but not use up too many resources. They have to stay in a dorm, and so we'll see. That also has not been finalized. They're still negotiating with Arizona State about how that partnership will work. And one other higher education topic that wasn't wasn't related to UT was Knoxville College. They've got new leadership. Got the new president, the interim president is Leonard Adams Jr. He's an alumnus. He also runs a housing nonprofit in Atlanta, and one of the things that his plan to revitalize Knoxville College and kind of bring it back from the brink is to use housing and other community services to help fund the academic side of the school. So they're going to build at least, they've got build one new apartment complex on the back side of the campus near Beaumont Avenue, and then they've got some other renovations they're going to be doing. They're trying to get their accreditation back. They've renegotiated their debt. So they've put together a 10-year plan to kind of come back, which Knoxville College once was probably the preeminent institution in the African American community in Knoxville, and of course it's been gone through hard times the last few decades, and there are a lot of people who are in its corner, hoping that it does make a comeback.
Right. Well, lots of things that we will probably be talking more about in this coming year. I thought we should also hit on a couple of issues that I think had interesting arcs, I guess you could say, in 2022 that cut across all of these different individual realms we've been talking about. One is COVID. And I think it's interesting that as 2022 ended, basically, at least here in Tennessee, in Knoxville and Knox County, COVID is not really part of the conversation anymore. We still get weekly reports from the county health department on cases and deaths and so forth, hospitalizations. There is still a fair amount of COVID. I mean, it's at a relatively low level. We are nowhere near the peaks of the pandemic, but people are still getting COVID every week, every day in Knox County, and we are having some deaths, although the death numbers have really come down a lot, and the hospitalization numbers have stayed relatively low. But it's interesting to think that, at the beginning of 2022, we were right in the middle of the big Omicron surge. We had some of our highest case counts, highest hospitalizations, highest death numbers of the whole pandemic. We were in this sort of intractable legal battle in the school system over a mask mandate that a federal judge had put down, and that, consumed a tremendous amount of local political energy and dialogue and legal battles that really continued into the spring. And then it just kind of died off, right?
It did. One of the things.
Are we through the pandemic? Is that what's going on?
No, I don't know if you would call it through the pandemic. It might be. It definitely appears to be in a transition time to be from pandemic to endemic. And like you said, last year at this time we were in still on the upswing on the Omicron surge, and then when it fell off, it's pretty much stayed very, very steady. What they call the disease burden in Knox County has just been fairly steady since then. And the big in public health professionals, the big thing they worry about is the effect on the healthcare system? Can we handle these people who are sick? So as this has moved on, the number of cases, and we don't know how many cases there are because we'll get to that in a minute, but the number of cases doesn't matter to them. Because if you get, I mean, you and I both had COVID. Neither of us had a severe case. Neither of us reported it to the health department because we did home tests. What they are really concerned about is hospitalizations, because that is the real where the real impact shows up in the hospitalizations and deaths. And hospitalizations they've remained steady. Usually right now we're running about 60, 65 cases a day, patients per day in the region's hospitals. That's way down. There was hundreds and hundreds per day back in the during the surges that we've had. And those have remained pretty steady. And as long as those remain pretty steady, that's good for the public health system. As I said, we don't know the number who've tested positive because the home tests aren't reported. And right now we know even less than we do about the flu, and the flu isn't reported either in the same way. But I think it's transitioning to be an illness that's going to be tracked and reported on by the health system and probably the media, much like the flu is, because it's been around. It does kill people. The flu kills people. It does put people in the hospital. The flu puts people in the hospital. As far as those, as long as those numbers stay relatively low, I don't know. We'll say the pandemic's over, but it's certainly become part of everyday life. It isn't the novel coronavirus it was in 2020.
Yeah, and most people seem to have kind of made their own adjustments. I mean, some people still are limiting their social engagement and so forth, depending on their own risk factors, and I do see some people wearing masks. That's ticked up a little bit, I feel like, in the last month. I think as probably more people have known people who are getting sick. Certainly, I've known several people who've had COVID just in the last month or so. But right, it's moving more into that individual realm, certainly out of the public policy realm, pretty much altogether as far as our local governments are concerned.
Yeah. One thing, and you mentioned that about mass uptick. One of the things that's happened is, when COVID hit, and people did start wearing masks, the flu disappeared for the most part. And now that people have been going without masks, by and large, there are times you go to a supermarket and no one's wearing a mask. You might see one wearing a mask. It's you just don't see it, on a regular basis anymore. And the flu is on the uptick, and other respiratory diseases are increasing. And part of that, obviously, is that people aren't wearing masks anymore. So, and I think that with all those going around, that people are saying, well, maybe you ought to wear a mask. So,
yeah, I mean, I have to say, personally, I have not been wearing a mask, and I've had 2 nasty colds in the last 2 months. And so I'm thinking, setting COVID aside, there's other reasons that maybe I should go back to wearing a mask just to not keep getting colds and the other things that are out there.
Well, that's what other countries do. I mean, one of the things that Americans used to kind of think was kind of silly was all the people in Japan who would wear masks on the subways and things like that, and they did that to prevent the spread of colds. It wasn't COVID. It was colds. So, but I doubt very seriously that will be the reaction of most Americans in the future. But as long as those COVID numbers remain low, then I think that people are be making their own peace with how they're going to deal with it.
Yep. Well, another major public health issue, really, that was front and center this year nationally at the state level and certainly locally was abortion. Obviously, we had the Supreme Court overturned the Roe versus Wade decision, and after 50 years of having abortion as an established constitutional right, it no longer is. Which meant that states were now free to regulate it as they see fit. And Tennessee, of course, had already passed this very strict ban that took effect at the end of August. And so we now have essentially all abortions are illegal in Tennessee from the point of fertilization. And that led to immediately all of the abortion clinics in the state just shut down, stopped providing abortions right here in Knoxville. The Knoxville Center for Reproductive Health, which had been open since I think 1975, just closed. Planned Parenthood, which of course had its building burned to the ground a year ago by an arsonist, is rebuilding that building on Cherry Street and fully intends to reopen it, they say, but they are of course not going to be providing abortions. They're going to be providing birth control, other kinds of reproductive health care. And we have started to hear some, when this ban went into effect, we heard warnings from a lot of people, including doctors, saying that its restrictions on even actions to save the life or health of a pregnant patient, that those were potentially going to have bad effects. And we have, at least anecdotally, started to hear those stories, both here and in other states that have similarly strict bans. Basically, there are people who, fully intend to carry a pregnancy to term, and then something goes wrong. They start to miscarry, or there's some other health problem that intervenes, which are not uncommon in pregnancies. And then they go to their doctor and before this ban came into effect, in a lot of those cases, doctors would have said, well, it probably makes sense to basically have an abortion here because of the health threats from whatever the situation is. And they're not doing that anymore. And we are hearing stories of women who are miscarrying, who are going to other states for treatment because they can't get treatment here. And of course, some members of the legislature are talking about, including some Republicans, are talking about bringing some exceptions to that law in this coming legislative session. Tennessee Right to Life and other anti-abortion groups have made very clear that they will fight any effort to, build out any sort of carve-outs in that law, because they really want that law to be as strict as possible. So I think we're going to continue to have conversation about this. And of course, journalistically, one of the hard things about this story for us is that we want to tell the stories of the impacts that this is having here in our local community, but most of those are hidden. The people who are being impacted by it, of course, we don't know who they are, and a lot of them have lots of reasons to not want to talk about it publicly. And so this is kind of like, we know that things are going on. We know that this is having real effects on people, but it's hard to see what those effects are. Just as it was when abortion was legal, it was hard to see what the impacts were too, because it's generally a very private thing. Nevertheless, in the coming year, we will continue to try to illuminate as we can the impact that is having on people, because we know those impacts are there.
Yeah, you were certain that that women are driving from Knoxville probably to Bristol, Virginia, to have abortions. They're having to travel to do that. We if there are doctors who are performing procedures to save the life of a mother. We don't know about that. That's it's a private medical matter that, unless somebody gets prosecuted for it, we'll never know. And so, and we don't know how many, times doctors are not performing procedures because they're unsure about their criminal liability, and then the woman either dies or has severe complications from it. We won't know that. So it's very difficult unless people come forward and talk about it for us to report on individual circumstances like that.
Yep, absolutely. Well, we'll do what we can to continue to track it in 2023. All right, I think that kind of wraps up our year in review here. Hey, Seth, why don't we take a quick break and I can top up my mug of peppermint tea. Okay, now we are to the Q&A portion of the podcast. Every week we go onto our subscriber-only Facebook page, the Compass Colloquy, available to all of our subscribers. You can find subscription information at CompassKnox.com. And we ask if there's anything in particular that people would like to hear talked about on the podcast, any, random thoughts or questions they had. And we got a couple this week, and one person coming out of this very cold spell that we just had that we were talking about, one person was worried about our local unhoused population. Where do homeless people go when it gets that cold, that literally being outdoors is a potential life and death threat? And Scott, this question comes up pretty much every winter when the weather turns bad, and I believe the answer to it is that under those circumstances, shelter is available, right?
Yeah, what the shelters will do is they'll put out a white flag, and that's to let people know that they can come to the shelters. Most of the shelters have kind of restrictions on their guests, and a lot of people who are unhoused chafe at those restrictions. It's one of the reasons that they don't routinely stay in the shelters. But when the white flag's out, the restrictions go away, and they don't turn people away. They can come in. They'll be crowded, but they'll let people in as to the extent that they can, and so that's an option. One of the things that they did this year was the city and the county and the nonprofits that run the shelters got together, and they put up warming stations, and they're basically tents with heaters inside and chairs and all, and they were temporary areas for people to come in and warm up, get some snacks, maybe something hot to drink. But if they still didn't want to go into a shelter, then they could go in there and warm up for a while and go on. Other than that, what ends up happening, and it's one of the reasons is because we don't have the housing, is that people who are homeless, when the weather gets really bad, will break into empty houses, abandoned industrial buildings, things like that, just to get out of the elements. Sometimes they'll build fires in them. Sometimes they'll burn down the house they're in because it's the fire spreads. But that's basically the way to get in out of the cold. And obviously, the shelters are probably the best option for someplace safe to go, that's warm, that you can spend the night, but that's available whenever. I don't know if they have an exact temperature cutoff for that. But when the temperatures get really cold, the shelters will do that.
Yeah, and I believe there's also a couple of churches that are available. Like if the shelters reach an overflow point in those circumstances, there are churches that are available, that make their gymnasiums or other areas with cots available to people. So I think that when it does get that cold, people who really just want to get out of the cold, usually there is someplace for people to go. Of course, there are then also sometimes people who, just have a couple extra sleeping bags and say, I'm going to try to tough it out. I don't believe that we heard of any fatalities from this cold snap that we had. That's pretty uncommon that we hear of people actually freezing to death.
Yeah, I did not hear of any. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, but I haven't heard of it. I do remember, it does happen from time to time. I remember years ago I was working on a story and interviewed a homeless individual who basically was squatting in a house in Fort Sanders that was empty. And then a few days later, he wound up dead. He was froze to death. But he was aided in that because he was apparently fond of huffing paint. And when they found him, he had the telltale signs of paint huffing.
Passed out and then
he passed out and then froze to death. Is kind of the theory that the authorities went under, but it does happen. It can happen, and certainly hope that that whenever it gets like that everyone can get to a place where they're at least out of the elements and not in danger of dying.
Well, and our weather, of course, here locally has warmed up significantly from last week. So hopefully that at least is not a concern for people as we start the new year. And I think that's going to wrap us up for the week. So Happy New Year again to everybody.
Happy New Year, Jesse. Happy New Year to Seth.
Happy New Year, fellas.
And thanks so much for all the work you do engineering-wise and getting us on the air. So we really appreciate that.
Well, thank you for the money you pay me to do it.
Our theme music is by William Wright, and we will be back next week to talk a little bit about some of the things we expect to see in the rest of 2023.
Welcome to Compass Points, the weekly podcast for CompassKnox.com. CompassKnox.com is your best source for news and politics in Knoxville and Knox County. Your hosts today are Scott Barker and Jesse Mayshark, the founders of CompassKnox.com. You can find their daily in-depth coverage and subscribe at CompassKnox.com. The Compass Point podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Almost an Agreement. Almost an Agreement is a layman's attempt to get a handle on the workings in government and politics that we deal with every day. Check them out at almostanagreement.com or subscribe for free on your favorite podcast provider. If you'd like to learn more about the topics discussed on today's podcast, go to CompassKnox.com and subscribe for in-depth coverage and much more. And many thanks to William Wright for composing our theme song. Compass Points is a partnership of Barking Shark Media and Barbarian Productions, and recorded by Lord Seth A. Barber at Barbarian Studios, Knoxville, Tennessee.